Okay. Who would like to go first, or how have you, anybody discussed any ordering, or we have groups of you presenting, I know. Anybody who had discussed how to do this and who wants to lead off? As a group, did any of you talk as a group and say, how shall we present and comment at all, or is this the very first time? Okay, so let's take an example, maybe a smaller one. I know who did we have? Taylor. Taylor, you had one collaborator, commentator who's also working on.
Yeah, Zintao, we're both looking at work issues.
Is he here?
Mm-hmm.
Shantan, okay. So what if maybe Taylor goes first and then Shantan discusses and then vice versa? Okay, and so we've got 3 hours, we got 10 people. So this is, but if we have time, so if we divide 10 people, so we have a little, let's take off, say 2 hours and 2 3/4 hours, 60, 180, 80, 83, 210 divided by, so it's about 20 minutes for total. So what if you talk for everybody aims to talk about, to present in about 10 minutes, and then have 4 or 5 minutes for, say, 4 or 5 minutes for the discussant, and then more general discussion. And so we have rough, I think that's about right. We have roughly 20 minutes for each person in that way. I'll double check, but I think that's right. So start off with 10 minutes. we are your audience.
Okay, sounds good. So before I share my screen, I think I'll just remind you all of my project. So I am doing a digital ethnography about 3 Facebook groups dedicated to the FIRE movement. And the FIRE movement stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And there's a misconception that everyone in this group wants to retire early. That's not the case. So, for the most part, many of them focus on the FI part of that acronym. So that's the financial independence part.
Well, let me, yeah.
I'll just wait. So,
did you just get some x-rays?
I'm sorry, wait.
Okay, great.
So, okay, yeah, financial independence.
No, I'm teaching a 3-hour class, and this is urgent, and you'll be
being able to.
So I'd love any reactions you could give me to the x-rays. And did you got the Northwestern report, which said maybe no major fracture?
We're all, we all have to do mandatory work, right? Because we live in the capitalist system. But the people who subscribe to this movement, they resent that. They don't want to work. Some of them do want to work. Some of them want to do work that's more meaningful. So that's where the FI part comes in. They just want to earn enough money through their investments that they don't have to do work. Yes, some, however, want to retire, and some people in the movement retire in their 20s or early 30s, which is far under the average retirement age of like 62 or so. So that's the community that I'm looking at. And I've been engaging in the Facebook group since the fall. I've interviewed 12 people. I hope to interview maybe just like a couple more, just because I need some more men. My sample is really skewed toward women. Mostly women reached out to me. I'm not allowed to reach out to people in these Facebook groups through their rules, they're only allowed to reach out to me. So that's kind of a limitation of who I'm able to connect with. And now I'm going to share my screen. So in terms of, you guys see my screen? Can you nod if you see my screen? Okay. So, so I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around like what we're doing in class, because with qualitative ethnographic work, it hasn't been like my training exactly to like create hypotheses and then propositions and like kind of test them. So I'm trying to reconcile that. So I identified some causal drivers of the movement: economic factors, social factors, and cultural factors. I'll actually just take you down to this diagram I made. And so I'm trying to just embrace what we've learned in class to understand the causal factors that have instigated the emergence of this movement in the 1990s, and also maybe some factors that can tell us why people continue to participate in the movement. So how it emerged and what motivates people to continue to join. And so a lot of this deals with like labor history, you know, just like trends in labor history, things I've learned in other classes on labor politics. And so in terms of the class reading, happy to hear feedback on that. I'm definitely touching on Marx. In terms, I'm looking at Weber in terms of good works. And then I'm really digging into American exceptionalism for the part where I discuss like America's work ethic, because this movement is primarily based in America. And then I'm also employing the idea of scenes and the workplace as a specific scene. So that's about like 4 ideas from class, but I'm open to others. I don't know. Does anyone have any questions before? I got a little distracted toward the middle there. So does anyone have any questions before, I guess, Jean-Tao and I talk? Okay, no questions. All right, well then, you know, hit me with some comments because I'm very eager for feedback.
Yeah, I will kind of share some discussion like orient like directions. It's kind of like because we are really working on similar topics, and I didn't really think about American exceptionalism theory. I didn't incorporate it in my original theoretical framework, but I should do. It's kind of like I have a critique on the American exceptionalism in my kind of, especially on the idea of productivity. But
Yeah.
I didn't cite Lipset, but I should. I was kind of saying that because I read another work by a Duke professor, Kathy Weeks. She writes about the concept that she published a book in 2011, then the problem with work. So in that book, she discusses American work ethics. And she gave a chapter discussing labor basically, and she says that there is a strong productivist tendency in American Puritan tradition, but also she points out that Marxism and feminism we have today are actually also productivist. It's a very interesting claim, and I really kind of I really resonate with that. So it's kind of like but like she only discusses it in the context of America, because he thinks that America is a liberal or neoliberal state, has a lot of like in the Marxist definition of the bourgeois society. But I feel like sometimes like the state factor could matter a lot, especially in the Chinese case. The American presidents, they said something about American dream. That's kind of interesting, like state apparatus intervening into that discourse. But in the Chinese case, the state apparatus takes a much more dominating role, and in China, there's also a strong productivist tendency. So don't want to say that's American exceptionalism. It's like all over the world right now,
Yeah.
including the socialist camp, like Soviet Union, China, Cuba. They have their plans like for economic development, and they to realize those policy goals, and especially to compete with the capitalist countries. Like during the socialist era, they forged a lot of kind of socialist discourse to encourage the workers to work harder. So that's the kind of socialist version of productivism, which is correctly critiqued by Weeks, and also I think Spencer also critique that. It's kind of all Marxism is really unclear on like the efficiency. Is Marxism also emphasizing efficiency? That's a really interesting discussing point like here. So maybe it's not only the American or neoliberal camp that is endorsing productivism or efficiency, but also the so-called socialist countries in the history. So it's kind of like a universalist stuff, especially when all the countries engage into a global competition for dominance, like the realist theory, they kind of like want to compete with each other for GDP, and GDP produces military and weapons, whatever. So that's kind of like my comment. I don't know whether other people have points resonating to that. My second point is Habermas. So Habermas, so you are doing a digital ethnography. I was also kind of working on that because I was looking at the online debate in China about the work ethics, like in surging, like surging during the 996 debates. So the internet as a public space, you can cite that. It's kind of like using Habermas as another example, saying that, oh, here's a media that people are kind of creating a certain culture. And what about the public authority? Like maybe that does not apply to your case, but for me, it matters
I missed it.
Public authority. Yeah, yeah. I don't know whether that is relevant to your case. Yeah, that's all my comments. Yes.
Thank you for those comments. I think that Habermas note is a great. That's a great addition. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Hi, Dr. Clark. I think yeah. Could I show you this diagram that I?
Bike accident and had a doctor just calling after 2 weeks, so I had to take that.
No worries.
Thank you.
No worries at all. I was wondering if I could just show you kind of like what I was explaining to the class that I'm trying to embrace what we learned with like Stitchcomb and Blaylock, and the idea of like building propositions, because that hasn't really been like a focus of what I've learned in like my digital ethnography classes and my qualitative ethnography classes. So I'm trying to incorporate that. And I want to make sure I'm kind of on the right track. Can I show you my screen?
Sure, but I mean, I'll read the full papers, and so, but as much as you find useful.
Yeah, this is not the full paper. I just actually made like a quick outline for this class. So I'll just show you my diagram. So so is this kind of like what we're talking about when we're talking about like, you know, A motivating B and stuff?
This is perfect. Yes.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah. And so then this is kind of like the framework upon which I would tell the story of the social and historical context which gave rise to this movement.
Okay, and the rising distrust in government is okay. I mean, interesting. You've got a wide range of things here, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
The first middle one, the breakdown of employee-employer relationship. I guess my concern is maybe you're doing this thinking about the whole United States economy rather than an individual or an individual workplace, because you don't need to assume that that's true everywhere. I mean, that's, in a sense, this is
I mean, the traditional employee-employer relationship with all the benefits and stuff, like.
Okay, no, that's not clear at all. I mean, I'm thinking more you know, that a Marxian revolution or something like that.
Oh, no, more in a structural sense, like the trends in employment relations. Maybe I just need to, it would, yeah, this is just kind of a quick mock-up of like more of these ideas. But okay, okay, sounds good. Feel I'm moving in the right direction with that. Cool. Well, thank you, Jean-Tao, for those comments. Really appreciate it.
Anyone else have a comment? Question? All right, let's well, okay, so when Bin, how, so you, no, yeah, no, we're Jean-Tao, will you then present now?
Yes, sure.
Okay, great.
So, okay. So I'm working on, I already completed this thesis, but I still want comments because I want to use it as a writing sample. I want comments and editing. I will just continue doing the revising in the summer. So the topic is overwork and the hard work discourses during the 996 debate. Due to limitation of space, I can only focus on the state apparatus and its role, its historical role, and and also its role in the 996 debate to produce and reproduce the Chinese work ethics. So this is abstract. So basically, I feel like there's this is a really understudied topic in the scholarship of Chinese labor politics and work culture, because people usually take Chinese work ethics for granted. It's kind of like cultural paradigm stuff in the Asian studies. Like, all people say that, oh, there's Asian work ethics, but what about its origin? What about the reproduction process? Where did it come? Because like it doesn't come naturally by itself. Because like even in the West, Weber argued that there is a certain historical process which bring that work ethic into this existence. So this thesis is quite interested in that. So the goal is to dig, kind of as an attempt to dig the roots of Chinese work ethics. So I sketched a genealogy of Chinese work ethics from Maoist era, the Yan Great Production Campaign, and until today, the hard work campaign or 奋斗 campaign proposed by the Xi Jinping to regionalize the Chinese nation. So basically make China stronger, and also Chinese dream discourse, which is quite well known. So during the 996 debate, this kind of work ethics was under discussion. It's really a public discussion attracting so much attention that I feel like a lot of Chinese people are kind of still talking about this in their daily life. So this is an attempt for the government to rescue the Chinese work ethics under assault. And I deployed a very close discursive analysis. I argue that the Chinese state's discursive intervention into 996 debate involved clear strategizing and balancing always conflicting policy goals. So on the one hand, there is a productivist tendency or the policy goals. On the other hand, there's a welfareist consideration for the workers. The state is not completely negligent on the workers. Actually, China has one of the most progressive labor laws in the world. It's kind of outlawing the 996 practices. But yeah, the 996 practice is still there, like as a kind of informal practice in the real life. And the state decision to denounce the 996 while defending the Chinese work ethic discourses make this kind of really interesting and some kind of puzzle-like stuff I need to explore. And I argue that this might increase labor protests over working hours, but continue the informal 996 practices. So such outcomes might challenge the regime's ability to channel like working hour related grievances. It is quite new, the working hours complaints, because like in the 10 years ago, people didn't really complain about, especially Foxconn workers and factory workers, they didn't really complain about working hours. They complain about like working condition, work like safety issues. They complain about like paying, they are underpaid, they don't pay enough salaries. All the bosses run away, they don't get paid for their work. So this is quite a new issue today in China. Yeah, this will pose a challenge for the regime. So this is the essay, this is the paper itself. So the 996 working hour system means 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. a day, six days a week. But I want to say that actually, according to scholars, research, this like some places, some factories and IT companies actually impose a much harsher working hour system than this. Like some people joke it's a 007 system. So it's just like demanding you to stay in the company for the whole time sometimes. Okay, so yeah, I already talked a lot about this in the abstract. Yeah. So the Chinese official discourse really wants to draw a line between the 996 practices and the Fendou discourse or Chinese work ethic discourse. This really makes this interesting. This is interesting due to several reasons, like the Chinese government's participation in the 996 debate might serve as a prime example of the authoritarian regime's management of the cultural sphere, and thus a cultural reproduction process in regards to Chinese work ethics. The second interesting point is this grants a possibility to assess the resilience and the susceptibility of the authoritarian regime when it attempts to shape the cultural rules in the social field. Like we studied in our class, like the public authority and the private sphere, they're kind of competing with each other to shape the social field and also the cultural norms. So like the authoritarian regime, the public authority might be under challenge sometimes when the public like opinion changes over certain issues. So this is why I feel Habermas is quite relevant to my argument. And as an internet discussion, and you see the Chinese, the rising numbers of the netizens in China really makes this internet space significant. Like also an important addition to the Habermas discussion of the public space. So the last interesting point is like I want to examine what kind of effects, so real life effects on the production side, like how well this discussion influence a labor capital relationship. So I want to establish 5 points, like they are interrelated to each other, but kind of some of them minor, some of them major. These are my propositions for the thesis. So first is I will say the Chinese work ethics or hard work culture are responsible for the 996 practices. The second proposition is that the Chinese authoritarian regime played and is still playing significant role in the production of Chinese work culture. So my third proposition is the regime's responses and re-engineering in the 996 debates were results of societal pressures, especially business leaders' embellishment of illegal practices in the same tones as government propaganda. So that really makes the government uneasy about its role in the reproduction process of Chinese work ethics. That's also why the government made such an uneasy line drawing behavior. The fourth argument is I speculate that the regime's responses will reify Chinese work ethics and makes 996 practices possible, but they also establish new grounds for resistance and protests against 996 practices. The last point I argue is that I feel like the regime, well, it's really unlikely that the regime will renounce the hard work campaign it has insisted for so long since the foundation of the PRC or even the CCP Communist Party. The regime may face increasingly severe challenges to channel the grievances into the legal institutional channel, which the regime was doing through its progressive Chinese labor law, because the regime wants the people to know the law and find the government institution to complain about their grievances, but not taking those cases to the streets and make it kind of big news that people know about that and become unsatisfied with the regime or the government. Yeah, so these are more my theoretical framework. There are too detailed, so I won't discuss it right now. So I basically say that the theoretical framework could be suggest that 996 could be read as a cultural construct alongside with the materialist construct, which we understand it like it's like in a Marxist way, like okay, it's a labor capital production side issue, or it's a kind of people do 996 because of bonuses, because of stock advantages, because of they can gain some money from that. That's a materialistic aspect. But I'm adding to this discussion by saying that, oh, there is a cultural construct aspect of these work ethic discourses. I also highlighted the special interest and essential role of the state apparatus, which is much needed in the Chinese case to be discussed. At last, I situate like the discussion into a new internet space, new cultural space or public space, which I mean by the internet. So the later part of this paper, I trace the Piaget's history. So it's a genealogy of the work ethic discourses. After that, and also venture into 996 debate itself to examine the reasons. I guess that's all I want to say. And at the very last, I have some kind of discussion and evaluation of this re-engineering, but I feel like I've already kind of explained them roughly during my introduction to this thesis. Okay, I think that's it.
It's a really great topic and a wonderful thing to
actually,
explore.
I also have kind of like a further studies because I feel like this is a big topic. I really want to work on this in the future. Yeah, and I didn't really talk about consumerism, which Professor Clark emphasized a lot. But I will, if I get a chance in the future, I will get on that. Yeah.
What kind of data are you processing in your paper?
The primary data I'm having is the basically the government's editorials from the People's Daily and Xinhua News Agency, which are representative of the central government's voices in China. And also I use scripts and speeches from the business leaders in their argument, like saying that, okay, 996 is a good stuff instead of kind of a terrible exploitative practices. So those are my primary sources.
Nice. I like that.
Yeah.
I had a couple thoughts. I think you're leveraging a lot of the material from class. So I'm going to throw out a couple other things like people that you could maybe be interested in looking up. The anthropologist David Graeber he wrote about bullshit jobs, about jobs that just achieve nothing in capitalism. They just like push papers around. That might be interesting because I think another part of this equation is like, so there's an emphasis on work, but what's the consequence of all of that work, all of that labor? Like where does productivity lie in this equation? Because at least, yeah, that could be interesting. Also, I'm wondering how automation fits into this. I could be interesting to just give a nod to that because technology is so rapidly changing the labor landscape. So it might be worthwhile to include that. It might complicate your discourse a little. It might be interesting.
I agree. It's kind of this paper is focused. This paper is really biased, like discussion. I admit. I am skewed towards like the state apparatus instead of family, neighborhood, schools. The second bias is I skew towards the like cultural aspect. I didn't really include discussion on materialistic construct, as you said, like machines the working process, the production process itself. It's kind of looking at the external kind of contextual pictures about work ethics. But I agree. I definitely need to like work on that in the future. I mean, yeah.
Also, like one last comment. I'm not sure how this fits in exactly into the equation, but just the idea of worker well-being and worker health. I'm curious, like how that impacts this discussion, discussions about physical health, mental health. I'm sure that's in there, but I feel like that is really in the zeitgeist these days when talking about the future of work. Yeah, so very cool. A lot of good work. Yeah, I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, thank you for your suggestions. Yeah, for sure.
Any quick comments from anyone else? Questions? And Taylor has raised several things very briefly and politely, but you think about where you're going next. I mean, two strategies. I mean, one is to focus on the discourse, if you will, of state official, state general kind of agencies. The second is to look more at actual people and variations, and to look explicitly for variations. And where and why do some people actively embrace this strong work ethic and others either don't engage at all thinking or talking about it, whereas others may be actively fighting it. And I think of the example, say, of the city of Beijing and some other cities as well, Chengdu, have very active policies about nightlife and nighttime activities, which is something more than half of the GNP is involved in consumption and shopping, buying cars, televisions, computers, all this stuff. If the production or if the consumption of Apple computers in China goes down, that drives down the American stock market, because the Chinese consumption sector is such an important part of the US economy as in a mutual manner. Some have even said the Chinese / American economy is a single economy. In that kind of example, that is true. So in a sense, that nevertheless also implies we've got some people who are producing, others who are consuming. But in my example, the Chinese are the consumers and the Americans are the producers of Apple. And Apple is the largest corporation in the US. How does that fit the analysis? Your quick answer is, this is a competitive issue. We want China to be first in production. And so we'll try to produce more and make workers work harder. I mean, that's basically your simple answer, which is what some of the media covers. But that ignores the huge changes of people that I mentioned, such as the city. I mean, not just unemployed people. The city of Beijing, the major capital city, is doing the opposite in the sense of stressing nightlife, bars, clubs, restaurants, shopping for clothes and so forth. They've now got public, new and expanding. This is just the beginning, but they've started it, expanding public transit, forcing the shops to stay open late at night, 11, 12, something like that, depending on the shop, to generate more of a consumer consumption economy. And so it is an economy for people who are selling the goods and who are working as the salespersons. But for the majority of people who are not singing karaoke too late, or karaoke is in decline in China. But I'm simply saying, or maybe even think of that. How much is the decline of how I interpret the decline of karaoke and the rise of individual shopping at night? not just shopping, but also restaurant, night, cafes, clubs, and so forth. I mean, that's simply left out from what you have to say, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I didn't really discuss that aspect, consumerism aspect. It's kind of like, you know, I have a work here. It's kind of, I cited Kathy Wick's work a lot. It's kind of like she has a really interesting discussion on consumerism. So she said that consumerism might serve as an antimony to the productivism. Like, but at the same time, this is also reinforcement of production, because without the wage labor, you cannot have the money to consume to meet the desires all you want to do and to consume all the goods you want to consume. So this is both the antimony and also the reinforcement of the work ethics. Like in her argument, I don't know what to take on that, but yeah, definitely my thesis didn't really discuss this. Yeah, I should consider to have that discussion in the future. Yeah, thank you for your comment. Yeah.
And if you say Habermas is an important driver, this is half of Habermas. This is a whole, and this was Habermas, not today. This was Habermas at the beginning of the 19th century, 18th century, long time ago. So that the whole European continent is basically, he's stressing, in his interpretation, is consumption. Mm-hmm. At around a non-work style, based and also countering your argument that this comes from political authoritarianism precisely because of political authoritarianism. That's his main argument. And because the authoritarianism was so strong with censorship and the like, people in cafes in Paris or Rome or Madrid could not talk about politics or build stock markets or insurance companies. Instead, they would live the court life, or a mini version of the court life at a lower level, and they would not talk about work. And you had that especially in the newspapers, magazines, intellectuals discussion. The public intellectuals were not talking about work. They were talking about elegant lifestyle of the cultured elite. So that's a complete huge exception of, more than half of Europe doesn't fit the argument. That is, if you're making the political authoritarianism a major part of your argument, I see that as a complete contradiction with Habermas. Okay. That's a problem.
Okay. I'll try to see whether I can incorporate that part in. Yeah.
The third general one, which is a little different. Yeah. I mean, Taylor's talked to us about good works, the Calvinist idea, and many of the people who she's studying who are retiring from their official jobs are still doing and talking and thinking about helping other people, doing charity, or even in a sense raising a family, working with helping their older or younger relatives who are not work age, but and so helping other people, being kind, doing church-related activities. I mean, this is a massive area, certainly for Americans, but I made the point as well for the Chinese as well, that there's been a huge explosion of the third sector and it's distinctly so with COVID. I mentioned the story of the guy, the very smart, hardworking, ambitious MAPS student who left the MAPS program to go back to send out masks and so forth to help people, just because he wanted to do good works and help the Chinese who were suffering in the middle of COVID. How do you explain that? And he's working hard, he's ambitious, he's smart, he's not, is that in a sense, but he's not employed. That doesn't fit doesn't fit your story, I guess I'm saying.
Yeah, I understand. I completely agree on that kind of disagreements. Like this is really kind of biased towards certain kinds of discussion. Yeah, I also admit that this is only a partial explanation, but I can do this much from this point on. But I will definitely consider to kind of focus on more micro variations. That's what I'm going to do in the future. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily a critique that anything you say here is wrong. It's, in a sense, it's right in its context. And that's what I've said through the whole course. These things are not right or wrong, but it depends on what you want to focus on. And focusing as you have done, fine. But even there, I'm sure there's a lot of general national Chinese data and media, and certainly on the social media. I bet you can find other people who are not completely embracing the work ethic in this way. For just one bit of evidence, the most frequently used photograph taken on all the Chinese social media sites is food. People take pictures of the food in the restaurant or at their homes, having dinner, having lunch with their family and friends. Okay, that's not the work ethic.
Yeah, but that might reinforce it from Kathy Wick's argument. Yeah, so in some sense, yeah.
You're saying you can't afford one meal if you work in one more or less?
Yeah.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is the Chinese state, the propaganda apparatus is sophisticated. They're more sophisticated than your interpretation. I would try to work, that is, so I would work, I mean, there are two ways to go. One is to look at individual people, such as what do average people take pictures of, but two, who is there within the CCCP, and why is there not, if there is not more explicit recognition of aspects, these other aspects of consumption or lifestyle or nighttime shopping. And maybe it's there, maybe it is there, and you're simply not focusing on it. That is, the 5-year plan added our focus. There's adding this year a lot of work on making cities and more visibly attractive and appealing, and discussing scenes explicitly. So if we say, why? I mean, how could they ever have done this? Maybe they've been doing this. I mean, there's been a big focus on there has been a new and rising focus on cultural policy in the 5-year plans and in the CCCP propaganda. Now you can say that's just to control revolution and to keep people quiescent and not to be in the streets like Hong Kong, but it's more than that. I mean, I'm sure that they're sophisticated people who I've met who are on the propaganda committee of the CCCP, and they talk in sophisticated way, the same way as we do in the course about these kinds of issues. So maybe you're just not looking at other issues that are also in official Chinese leadership statements. And
sure.
In the body of the text about work, people may say it's good to work hard, and Americans would say the same. But on the other hand, Americans spend a lot of time talking about, lifestyle, being with your family values, being a good citizen, honest, et cetera, et cetera. The Boy Scouts, trustworthy, loyal, friendly, courteous, kind, friendly, et cetera. Those kinds of things. Those are not just work. Okay. All right. So maybe think about. Okay. So I think you hear these points, and on the other hand, is you say why and how. That is, you don't need to explain why are they doing this if you're saying this is only one thing which the Chinese leadership is stressing. If you say the Chinese leadership is also recognizing and stressing on page 27 instead of page 2, nightlife, and it's stressing consumption on another page, and it's also stressing health, and it's also stressing good family relations, and so forth. And so if you're saying, yes, there are statements about all of these, then there doesn't have to be any contradiction at all, perhaps. I mean, that's the simplest answer.
Yeah.
And you could then respond to that by saying, what's the that is quick critique of many Chinese researchers. There's very poor attention to sampling. You have not, Taylor had to ask you, what was your data? If you didn't tell us where and why and how did you choose these precise passages, and why those, that is why page 3 on work and not page 27 on consumption or page 29 on cultural policy, you're giving us, you were selecting them using some kind of criteria that is not scientific. Or that is, it's not descriptively representative of the database or the population of communist leadership or government leadership statements. And then why and how can you justify only focusing in a, I won't say bias. I mean, the methodological term is sampling bias or self-selection or sampling sample selection bias. Those are the three keywords. You get sample selection bias if you don't have a clear rationale for selecting the data that you're using. And you could add that. But think about, okay, sample selection bias.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else with other points? All right. Who should we go to next? We have clicking on view here.
Jia and I can go next because our presentation are also about Chinese and also social media, maybe a bit relevant.
Okay, that's fine. Please do.
So can you see the PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
So I basically will first show a brief introduction about my thesis using the PowerPoint because it looks more vivid. And then I will show my revision, the draft that I revised these days. So we can probably see something similar from the physical demonstrations and the online demonstrations in terms of Chinese nationalism. So, I mean, so from the first, we can see the different countries, the way of expressing nationalism may differ. So the most common kind of nationalist action that we know is street demonstrations, as we can see from the two pictures here. Those street demonstrations are not very common in China, but we indeed have several significant events like this. So the picture here is the 2012, the anti-Japan demonstrations. We can see, although you want me to show the direct posts, I include my translation here. So these are the slogans. So they said, get out of the Diaoyu Islands, Japs. So this is one humiliating term that those nationalists termed coined for the Japanese. And then boycott Japanese products, and Diaoyu Island are China's territories, and we urge the government to safeguard the Diaoyu Islands. So, but definitely Japan is not the only enemy of Chinese nationalists. They can be anyone who supports the independence of Hong Kong, Macau, and even Taiwan. So these two pictures just show how Chinese nationalists support the notion of one nation, one China, and how the Hong Kong, how a protester holding up the Hong Kong independence flag during the 2019 and 2020 protests in Hong Kong. So this logo is the logo of Weibo, one of China's biggest social media platform. So with the Hong Kong with the protests in Hong Kong intensified, so there are many like international luxury brands. They are getting caught in the crossfires because many Chinese social media users, they have been involved in an online hunt for global brands which list Hong Kong, Macau, or Taiwan as separate countries or regions, not part of China, on their official websites or their brand t-shirts, such as this one. So usually those hashtags, for example, the brand suspected of supporting Hong Kong and Taiwan independence will soon like receive more than like millions like views on Weibo. So many commentators condemned the brand, while others like accused it of being two-faced and for profiting from Chinese money while disregarding Chinese sovereignty. So such online nationalist emotions become aligned with what scholars have proposed, that in the past 10 years, the main battlefield of Chinese nationalism has been shifted from streets to online communities. More importantly, of all the aspects of Chinese internet culture, one most significant and yet least understood is its contentious character. So there are many innovative rituals of the ways that people express nationalists. So this is one example. In Chinese, we call it 弹幕, which means that when you watch some video, for example, YouTube videos, you can see the comments, like here and then. So this is just one cartoon which reflects Chinese nationalism. And then I want to show that, so many propose that such nationalism is kind of a pragmatic nationalism inspired by the party. So arguing that for the People's Republic of China's like leadership, taking control of the construction process is a political imperative. Since the 1980s, especially at the collapse of the Soviet Union, China's leaders have been implementing a patriotic education campaign that aims to stimulate national pride and cohesion by teaching Chinese history of resisting foreign aggression as a collective experience of suffering, struggle, and glory. So this is the picture, which is mainly for national rejuvenation. So then many argue that the Chinese nationalism has become a like runaway phenomena as state-educated Chinese nationalists confront complex regional and international issues with internalized nationalist scripts. In spite of government's efforts in shaping national narratives, it could be misleading to conclude that nationalism is merely a form of top-down indoctrination. So this comes to my research. So my research, the research head is arranging in my observation as to the BTS controversial speech after receiving the James Van Fleet Award. This South Korean boy band was strongly condemned on Chinese social media for the leader of the boy groups, a Red Monster speech in the picture. So Chinese netizens said that they spent totally one-sided attitude to the Korean War, hurts their feelings and negates the correct history of China. So this just make me wonder, how can I figure out who are the real nationalists and who are anti-fans of the BTS, those hoping to make use of nationalism to mask their real motives. Later, I realized that I can never tell who are nationalists, or yet I can see who are talking as a nationalist. So note that like people actually, they don't just use language to communicate information about the world. In fact, language does things become just referring or describing. It can be mobilized, reshape social relations. It sets up storylines that aim to constitute reality and raise life into identities constructed on the fly through interaction. So here comes my research question. My research question is actually, how can nationalism be linguistically constructed in online communities? And my research site is Douban. So I will briefly introduce like Douban. So, so, so in terms of the field side, so although I do think that Weibo is the most active, has the most like active internet users, is probably the most studied social media platforms, I would argue that Douban is more appropriate for probing and problematizing Chinese nationalism in online communities, because like Douban, which is a Chinese like social networking site, is a commercial platform for facilitating user-generated content, for instance, responses to movies, books, music, and cultural events. So specifically, Douban is famous for the function that called Douban Group, one of its main services, and users are free to create and join any group with sub-labels where its users usually share similar hobbies. So the group is one of the most popular and active groups in Douban, for it has around 700,000 members. So this is the largest group in Douban Group. And then, so in addition, compared with Weibo, each Douban group has very strict rules and regulations as to admission requirements, how to post and respond, including the content and quality. For example, like those registered for a Douban account for less than 5 to 7 years are not eligible to join the group, making user demography and more manageable. Next, I will introduce the theoretical framework in my thesis project. So, so the first, in order to understand like online narratives, like we need to understand what Bakhtin has long argued utterances cannot be understood like monologically. So in other words, the one who posts online and the commentator, in fact, they will enter a dialogic relationship in this process. And another term is registers, because for easier analysis, the concept register will prove very useful. One short example is that while we are working on campus, we can tell that who is someone who is the econ major students, because we heard that he's like probably talking something about the marginalized utility. So marginalized utility here is one of the registers in this contest. And then this is consistent with what I've said before about people are talking as a nationalist. So each time when we saw those buzzwords, we associate them with his or her persona. So registers are forms of speech, not simply correlates of speaker identity, rather they are signs that index social types. So for example, the Japs and nationalism and the Togo is like stealing country, which refers to South Korea, and ugly country, Togo, which means the United States. And then like when it comes to like 8,000 or kimchi, we will directly like think about something about nationalist. So this is just a brief introduction about my thesis project. Then I will show my revision draft. So I rewrote my introduction part since my like last draft, because I did not include the title of my thesis project is the discursive construction of nationalism, the case of kimchi controversy in Douban Group. So I first introduced what is a kimchi controversy. So I guess, I mean, Chinese here can understand what does this mean, who is Li Ziqi, and only for those who are unfamiliar with Chinese politics, I will briefly introduce that Li Ziqi is a very popular internet like celebrities on YouTube and Bilibili, Chinese version YouTube, I think. So because like, so one day, so when Li Ziqi posted a 20-minute video on YouTube. He showed how he prepared some pickled vegetables, tagging the video with Chinese cuisine and Chinese food. But some South Korean netizens, they recognized the pickled vegetables as Korean kimchi and then criticized Li Ziqi for her claiming that this is the Chinese cuisine. So worse, such comments enraged Chinese netizens who claimed that kimchi did originated from China. The kimchi debate soon became pervasive in all Chinese social media platforms, and Chinese netizens claimed that it is the South Korea who stole the pickled vegetables or kimchi in Korea from China. Discourse around the kimchi was highly contentious, leading to a collective social movement in online communities. So after the kimchi controversy, we like Chinese netizens stopped calling South Korea as South Korean, but a stealing country, which I said like Togo. So we can see, I will provide you an example here. So this is one post in online in Douban group. So I mean Douban Gezu, my field site called, so the title of this post called, I mean like I try to interpret it politely because this is definitely not a very polite way to say South Korea. So basically it says that evidence from Da Changjing, which is a TV series. So Ming Dynasty is a permanent ancestor of kimchi. So it showed how the TV program, I mean, how those TV series, how South Korean themselves say like cabbage is introduced from the Ming Dynasty. So, and then so this post racked up to 514 replies since July 16th, among which the following 2 replies were most liked. So 有没有棒子原版的可以给他们自己看，哈哈哈。棒子 actually, as I said before, is also another name for South Korean, which is not. So both Bangzi and South Korea are registered for we to analyze what Chinese nationalists are. So and then 可以搬到外网 battle 的水平, and then which means that we can repost these in foreign website and battle with them. So for example, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitter. So I only picked one example of the post here, but there are many similar examples. I mean, relevant posts regarding kimchi controversy and stealing country. I mean, South Korea and also Bangzi, also South Korean. But as to, because one of Professor Clark's comments is that I should incorporate like Weber's analysis on Chinese society to help me analyze Chinese nationalism. So I put it here. But I think I still need to figure out how does Weber's analysis of Chinese society really can explain nationalism, which keeps changing, because like according to the reading, I think that I think that like Weber used, so here like Weber used historical materials taken from widely different periods of Chinese history, ranging from blah blah kingdom to a second and first millennia BC to the early decades of the 20th century when he himself was writing. Yet he dismissed the chronological sequence of events. So they actually assume that there's an old myth of Chinese society which will last from like decades ago to today. However, I do think that historical Chinese imperialism is incomparable to nationalism, and the notion of nationalism is actually new to China. So, and also Chinese nationalism is always emerging and evolving. I'm not pretty sure like how can we use like Weber's analysis of the Chinese nation and the Chinese society to explain online nationalism in today's like political context. So this is my question that I have while I was revising my draft. So that's all for my presentation today.
Okay, who is commenting?
Me.
Please do.
Generally, I feel like this is a very interesting topic. And I think Windmill's choice of the group is very interesting because the group is one of the biggest public group on Douban, and generally in those public groups, you can post whatever topics you want, but among those 70,000 members, they tend to have this kind of trend to post this kind of national, patriotic posts. And I don't know, I just feel like the members in group has very high level of consensus, but I kind of don't understand how the administration group could filter these members out of all the applicants from the the entire application pool. So I think if you can explain more on the rules and how the filtration process go in group that would be better. And also I noticed that you have taken screenshots from posts with the most comments and the relevant comments under the post with the highest number of thumbs ups. One thing we need to notice is that the total amounts of likes or thumbs ups are not entirely from members that are in this group, because there are a lot of people, they're restricted from district rules made by the administrators of the group, and a lot of people who didn't get into the groups are frequently checking the group post and the comments under the post. So I don't know if those comments with the highest number of likes, they're really representative of what the members really think about this kind of issues. Yeah, I think that's basically it.
Okay, other comments, questions from anyone?
I just briefly saw a sentence you said that Chinese imperialism. Oh, when you're discussing Max Weber, you say Chinese imperialism is incommensurable to Chinese nationalism. If I remember it correctly, I feel like this claim might be too absolute in some sense. Yeah, could you kind of, yeah, maybe you want kind of revise it somehow? Yeah, I don't know what your opinion about that. It's just I feel like it's not exactly completely incommensurable, but it's just it's relevant. And it's also not either. Yeah, I will say that. Okay.
I also have a question on the Douban side, because I know outside the group, Douban is the website famous for people actually against nationalism, and people criticize being Hengguodang on the Douban website. And I feel like the question of discourse and register is very important, because I think those two groups of people does not really share the same register, and they often engage in combating against each other. Often they just remaining on each the opposite side without actually engaging in real communication with each other. So I'm just wondering how the Douban website as a platform that embody both group of people, how they communicate and interact with each other on the website.
I actually have another point to add, because Group E has like very extreme reputation. One is for like hating the country, and one is for like kind of crazy nationalism. So I don't know. So I don't know, Wimel, how would you like address this kind of like extreme condition?
Yeah, I agree. I like just based on my own observation, it seems like that it depends on what time is it. I mean, like for example, like recently because the men like because recently people don't care. I mean, just today, for example, this week, in recent months, people don't care about kimchi. Actually, they just care about kimchi in January when Li Ziqi posted that video on YouTube. And then after one month, people don't care about kimchi. So when kimchi was the trending topic in Douban, and then there were more nationalists than those liberals. And then when it goes to the debate regarding Nike, I mean the Xinjiang like wool cotton, and then we can see there's like so we can see there's a higher level of nationalism in Douban group. But right now, if you post in Douban saying that you are more liberal than a nationalist, then probably you will get more support right now because currently at this moment, like less people care about if you are a nationalist or not. People care about other things. For example, feminism. For example, some like TV series, some other things. So I think it depends on when you make the research. So I think nationalism or nationalist sentiments in online communities is actually situational. It's not always there, but sometimes it can be at peak. And then sometimes maybe nobody cares about that.
Okay, our time is going on. So GA, will you present? Thank you, Wenmao.
Can you all see the document?
Yes.
So my research topic is about feminist movement in China. And right now I am at like the very early stage doing the like literature review and all those stuff. I haven't like collect a lot of data, like interviews or other stuff from the Douban site. So I will just briefly introduce what I am doing and see like how I can incorporate more like class readings into the literature review. So first I kind of introduce what I am doing. I wrote about like how the online activism is different from like conventional or traditional types of social movement. These online activism is more, they focus more on like the ideological issues instead of materialistic issues, and the new social movement are less hierarchical, and more people can participate in these kind of social movements. And then I talk about how after the spread of internet, online activism has become popular in China. It is especially the case after 2017, when the hashtag #MeToo movement went viral on Twitter. It is ignited by a Hollywood actress or producer. She claims that the Hollywood director and producer has sexually assaulted her. and she made the post on Twitter, #MeToo, to rise like the like arose consensus from the like fellow women workers in the film industry, and a lot of women who have the similar experience have retweeting and tweet about their experience on social media. And then a lot of women in Asia, especially South Korea, they have take over the Flag for Social movement and start to promote like feminist ideologies and all those stuff. And then in 2017, a college student made the post on Weibo and accusing her professor in university has sexually assaulted her. And a lot of Chinese women also voiced for her and felt for her on Weibo. And then this like trend of feminist movement has started. So in order to understand like online activism and feminist movement in China, I did a little like literature review. So the internet is can be seen as a means for information dissemination, but it is more than that. It also like offer people with a medium to engage themselves in public discourse. And a lot of scholars also argue that the internet can be highly democratic with tools allowing people to participate in political discussion. And these kind of online discourse or public discourse is very like unconventional. Conventional public participation is about like voting or like institutionalized through like institutionalized civic groups, but online political participation is a lot more like hierarchical and transparent. And as the membership for like those traditional civic groups has declined, as outlined in Putnam's Bowling Alone, more people tend to engage in the tertiary organizations and NGOs, as well as those online communities to engage in these kind of new forms of political participation. So there are other like scholars argue that online participation via social media is a unique and distinctive type of participation that has the power to recruit like marginalized group even more than the advantaged ones. And then I wrote about like how like these interactions on online, how the interactions within the online communities can help like mobilize a movement or like recruit more members and other stuff. Also, it is important to notice that these kind of online communities are like usually self-governed, but some of them, they have leaders, managers, or administrators. They have taken the responsibility to like filter who's in the group and who's out, and they have the right to decide what kind of strategies to use or what tactics that we need to use in order to boost the movement. I also kind of want to incorporate Durkheim into this kind of literature review, but I haven't like figured it out. My rough thoughts are like, I kind of want to know like the regulations of those online communities. I kind of want to know if it fits with the mechanical solidarity or organic solidarity, but that's immature thoughts. I'll think it over. And it is interesting that a lot of scholar has put their interest in online activism in China, because as we know, China has very like severe or strict censorship on social media. They use firewall and keyword blocking and other like manual ways for censoring the posts that people made on social media. So for online activists, they have to watch their words, and in order to circumvent certain kinds of censorship. Yeah, there are scholars that they identify sometimes people use satire in their post to avoid direct keyword blocking. And there are some feminist organizations, they use a group name that doesn't indicate that they are a feminist group. So that's basically it. I also collect data from Douban sites because it presents features of a complex social media platform where people can build connections through like ratings and reviews of books, films, music, and games, or personal blogs and posts where keywords can be searched by the others, and 3, interest groups where individual users are engaged in. So in this paper, I want to investigate how the strategies utilized by the virtual feminist communities. And I chose a group called Tashuo, or Her Say, Her Words, to examine. And it is a relatively small group with only 20,000 people. And I intend to interview the administrator groups, ask them about how they make those regulations and rules. Also, I intend to interview the group members about how and why they decide to stay in this group, and if they agree with those regulation rules posted by the administrator team. Yeah, that's basically it. These are the 2 hypotheses, but I'm still considering if I need to keep them. These 2 hypotheses, they're mainly for the members of the group instead of the administrators team. So yeah, that's basically it.
Wenmao, do you have comments?
I really enjoy your presentation, Jiayi, because feminism is really a very interesting topic. I think it's even more contentious than nationalism today in online communities, to be honest. And So I think online feminism is interesting. One reason is the online national, not online national, online feminism. Online feminism maybe is different from feminism in reality, right? And online and Douban feminism maybe it's different from Weibo feminism. It's also different from Bilibili feminism, because like different social media platform, they have different definition about feminism. So I wonder how can we define feminism in Douban? Because I'm sorry that if I understand this incorrect, because in my understanding that feminism, the definition of feminism keep evolving. Like people keep redefining what feminism mean in China, especially in many Douban groups. So I think there's kind of like orthodox feminism, for example, just in Douban group, in group I'm not sure whether it's same for Tashuo. So if you want to be a good feminist, or if you want to be a good girl, you probably don't get married. If you get married, probably don't have a baby. If you really have a baby, please have a daughter rather than have a son. If you have a baby, so let your baby like follow your family name rather than the father's family name. And then if you have you'd better have a job, and then do not please your mother-in-law or father-in-law. I mean, they have many kinds of requirements for how to be a good feminist. So under such circumstances, how can we define feminism? Because it seems like it has many strict rules and regulations. It's hard for each like group users to fit into that definition about feminist. Yes, I think Wenbin's point about Papi Jiang is really a good case. So how can we understand that?
I mean, from February, where I started to like join this group and observing the posts they made, till like late May, the definition of feminism has keep evolving and become like more detailed and I don't know, maybe more radical. Recently, the feminists in Tashuo, they post like stricter rules for letting people in, and they order or they require those applicants to agree with them that as women we should not we should not be like obedient, and we should not like be in like serious like relationship with men, and we should not be married, and we should not like idolizing anyone, especially males. And it's basically a set of rules that are passed from South Korea to China. But earlier this year, I remember like the set of rules for that the administrator made for letting people in is that you just need to state that you are a woman instead of a male, and you can write about your own understanding about feminism, and if that fits the general definition of feminism, you can get in the group. So during this 3 months period, a lot of things has happened that made the administrators group to revise all those rules and regulations for the applicants. First, it is Yang Li's case, and the second, on some day in April, in one night, 7 or 9 groups that has feminist inclinations that has been bombed. They just disappeared from this site. So the administrators group sense there might be something wrong on Douban's site, and they feel like the feminist, the ideology of radical feminism might not be favored by the state. So they decided to make the rules stricter and to check each applicant closely to avoid a case like in case they let a man in and they just want to avoid any male to get in the group and
All right,
sorry,
we're almost at 6 o'clock. We've only had 4 people speak, so we need to go a little faster. But why don't we take our break for? I'm on the right time, aren't I? Isn't it 6 o'clock when we have a break? I'm just confused. Yeah. Okay. Let's take 15 minutes, and thank you, thoughtful, creative presenters. It's fine to send comments to everybody afterward, but these have gotten us started, and it's good to see the. I guess what's new today is there's really some emotion and emotional power, which has come out a little more forcefully, which is good to feel as well as read about in abstract terms. So thank you for bringing that to the class for all of us to see and to consider as part of how we handle all of this. All right, let's get back in 15 minutes. It's 5:59.
So I've been looking at the manosphere, particularly the red pill section of the manosphere, which is a group of anti-feminist communities online that have formed around a misogynistic ideology rooted in evolutionary psychology that essentially claims that women are naturally or biologically manipulative and self-interested, and that feminism has given women social and political dominance over men. And since I'm graduating this quarter, I've written a version of this thesis, but I wanted to focus on some aspects that I wasn't able to as much in that thesis, particularly that was looking at sort of individual aspects of what led people to adopt manosphere ideas. And I wanted to shift my focus to look at collective causes of what led these groups to develop. And I have 3 main propositions with some smaller propositions within those. The first focuses on new social movements as a factor in the development of the manosphere, particularly the women's liberation movement and gay liberation movement. The second looks at the reconfigurations of the labor market, and the third at the internet. So I'll talk about each of those briefly. So for the new social movements, I draw from R.W. Connell, who's a masculinity scholar, and she discusses the discovery of masculinity as a social problem that arose in part because of the women's liberation movement, which challenged the subordinated role of women, and also in part because of the gay liberation movement, which challenged norms of masculine heterosexuality. So the manosphere is a reaction against those movements, but also interestingly incorporates some of their language, particularly as it critiques aspects of male gender roles and draws on sort of a language of civil rights in portraying men as oppressed. And then I also look at reconfigurations of the labor market. Masculinity has often been tied to wage earning labor and sort of the image of men as breadwinners. And I tie that also to the Protestant ethic and favor, looking at themes of hard work and self-discipline. And I'm planning to focus on the decline of heavy industry and manufacturing, and sort of a tension between two different forms of masculinity, one that focuses more on dominance or strength, which is generally sort of a worker's masculinity, and another focused more on knowledge or expertise, so a more professional masculinity. And again, we see both of those in different manosphere groups. And then I'm also focusing on the internet. So I talk about some pre-internet men's movements. The men's liberation movement sort of rose around the same time as feminism, or as the women's liberation movement, and was largely a pro-feminist movement, but then it eventually splintered into the women's liberation movement and the men's liberation movement and the men's rights movement, which was a more anti-feminist movement. And I also touch on some men's self-help movements around the same time, including the mythopoetic men's movement, which has received a fair amount of scholarly attention from people who study masculinity. And then shifting to the internet, I look at the internet as something that proliferated and combined many of those earlier strains of men's movements. And I focus on Adorno and Horkheimer here, challenging the sort of top-down vision that they have of media. Yeah, and I also look at some of the shifts that I think occurred with the move to the internet, including that it spread internationally. So it's still primarily located in the United States, but there's sort of a transnational element to it, as well as an increasing focus on sort of lifestyle identity as opposed to a more political, cultural aesthetic. And I think I can stop there for feedback.
Okay. Teo 2, do you want to comment on Teo 1?
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that you'd already submitted a thesis because it was very, I mean, reading through it, it was very cleanly done. Everything made plenty of sense. One question based on what you just said, though. So do these three strains that you suggest, it's on page 2, are these condensed in the internet, or is the internet just a manifestation of that, of these three different influences on the manosphere coming together? This happened before the agent?
That's a good question. Yeah, I'd say I think that's definitely something I should make more clear in the paper. But I would say it's definitely sort of a new community in its internet context. So there's a lot of specific like language and terminology that's used on the online context that was not present in the previous forms of this movement. So it draws on a lot of similar themes, but I wouldn't say that it's a direct continuation of any of those movements.
And I guess the second thing would be a more general question about the population that you've interviewed, how you had access to them, because I mean, it seems really interesting. And I'm curious also if a lot of these people if they entered the manosphere via the internet, or if they already, had some of these ideas and the algorithms essentially kind of nudged them in the right direction. you know, is this a completely new individuals or a mix of new and old?
Right. Yeah, so that's something I focus on more in the more like individually focused version of the thesis. Yeah, but there are definitely many people were sort of exposed to it for the first time on the internet. And there were some people who said that prior to watching this content, they considered themselves like progressive or leftist. So there is, that's not the case for everyone I talk to, but there is sort of a newly introduced group of internet viewers. And as for recruitment, I have similar limitations to some of the people who have presented already, in that most people reached out to me from posts that I made on various forums and subreddits. Yeah, and I reached out to a few people as well based on their posts, but that was the main way that people were recruited.
Okay, fascinating.
Teo, too, do you want to go ahead with your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. All right, could everybody see?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'll just give a very quick overview, but before that, I'm going to throw in, let you guys know one of my biggest concerns so far.
Can you make it larger? Maybe.
Yes.
Okay, that's pretty good.
How's that?
Thank you.
All right. So in brief, the project really started from the Capitol insurrection and a paradox that emerged from it, or that identified in it, which is that all these people were essentially trying to overturn a legitimate election, but their claims were framed in democratic terms. So they were trying to defend American electoral institutions by, you know, storming into the Capitol and giving the election to Trump and whatnot. So that's the overarching question. And from this emerges a case study, which is the Proud Boys. More specifically, I'm interested in their ideology, which is categorized as the alt-light, as opposed to the alt-right. So those are two related puzzles that I'm probably going to ask, you know, how I could better incorporate, because I think my biggest issue now might be strategic. But just a brief summary, I've gone over the introduction of the puzzle. A lot of analyses of the insurrection obviously highlight Trump's role, because Trump was really the one that brought all these diverse far-right groups together. A lot of them were random individuals, you know, suburban dwellers from Ohio, real estate developers from Texas, militia members were there, the Proud Boys were there, but you don't really see you don't see neo-Nazis overtly present there, as you would in the Unite the Right rally of 2017, for example. So it's a very different group. But a lot of analyses kind of throw the Proud Boys into this far-right group, and also a lot of democratic theory doesn't quite engage the puzzle of the democratic claims. So I have two sets of literature. One, similar to Teo's, actually inspired by him. I engaged this question of causality, of agency. You know, is Trump really, can we just say this was Trump's doing? And obviously trying to bring Adorno and Horkheimer and Benjamin into the political realm, out of the cultural realm. I essentially try to suggest that, you know, this ruthless unity in the culture industry, this passivity that it produces, is also a way of looking at political actors. You know, are political ideas disseminated from the top down, and are people just, you know, sitting around and being like, yeah, you know, that makes me really upset. On the other hand, you have Walter Benjamin's analysis, which grants more agency. And I find that in Laclau's work on populism, these two, the relation between these two, and it's in a sense defined, if only loosely. It's the idea that populism is a discursive strategy in which a series of demands are articulated and linked together, and are represented in an empty signifier who is the leader. However, these demands, the leader cannot be reduced to these demands. So it's the idea that it's not just a top-down process, it's not just a bottom-up process. You can't reduce the alt-right and those at the insurrection to either ideas that existed or to Trump. And then, so I essentially use that to present the rest of the project, which I indicate is going to be descriptive rather than explanatory. So somewhat like Taylor's project and Teo's project, I'm not exactly looking for determining, you know, sets of causality, but rather identifying the alt-right as a very contemporary, very American, and very particular ideology that's worth understanding as opposed to other subgroups of the far right. I also, you know, taking from Dick Hebdig's piece on subcultures, I also think about the right as a set of subgroups with their own ideologies, with their own style, although I don't get into that, but each of these very particular and each of these transgressive against the mainstream politics of the MPC, even though there are fissures in that hegemony as a result of Trump. So the second part of the literature is the democratic theory, which essentially says, you know, how do we solve this puzzle of the Capitol insurrection if a lot of the democratic theory in sociology in particular focuses either on the state or on institutions, on processes, constitutions, and whatnot. And the conclusion is that, I'll be brief here, is that, and I also engaged some Tocquevillian theses about the importance of civil society for democracy, but where these all struggle is where they center the state in questions of democracy instead of the construction of the people. So for that, ethnographic methods are more helpful in determining the quality of social relations. And I draw from Dylan Riley and Michael Mann to suggest that more so than electoral institutions, notions of representation, of legitimate representation, and the question of, you know, who gets to participate in this democracy are just as important to understand the current political moment. So then I'm going to be using data from the Proud Boys' founder, who's a very big figure in the alt-right and whatnot, and a lawsuit as well, to try to identify the roots of the alt-right, draw boundaries, and be able to differentiate it, and also try to address this puzzle of, you know, are they really anti-racists, or are they just saying that because they don't want to be deplatformed, they don't want lawsuits, et cetera, et cetera. So my analysis is going to focus on trying to identify what they're really, you know, what they're really all about and what the implications are for democratic theory. Sorry, that was faster than I thought I could do it. But I guess my biggest question is, do I have two projects in one here? Do I have one that's focused on democratic theory and the Capitol insurrection? And, you know, is it a stretch to then go to the Proud Boys and be like, oh, and they were really present and here's another puzzle? Or has it been convincing enough, or could it be convincing to make a project out of these two together?
My answer is I'm convinced all of them are useful. But I shouldn't speak out so soon, and let others and Teo One comment first.
Yeah, I was also convinced. I think that the two aspects definitely work together. Something that I was wondering about while reading, I think I was really interested in your point towards the in like the last paragraph of what you had written about the shift towards an exclusionary movement, where that exclusion is not fully reducible to race, ethnicity, or religion. And I was interested in, yeah, I think that's an interesting element, and I was interested in that, especially in relation to, I guess, the distinction between the alt-right and alt-right. And I was curious about, I think you have a footnote about sort of the history of like the white power movement and the KKK, which was something I was interested in, whether you were interested in drawing that out, especially because I think it's interesting to see sort of the continuities and also changes between that kind of far-right movement and the alt-right.
Yeah, so that was actually in the text, and I thought maybe, maybe this feels like a bit of a side note. I'll throw that into the footnotes, but I think you're right. If I'm going to be working more on identifying, where this may have emerged from and why it's particular to this moment, it could be useful to have that brief genealogy.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be useful. Yeah, I was also very interested, just because I think this sort of relates to something that I was struggling with my own topic, and how you mentioned that most people at the insurrection were not formally affiliated with any group, which is definitely the case for the groups that I'm studying. And I had imagined that sort of as an internet specific phenomenon, and that people are anonymous and there's less of a formal structure. So it's interesting to hear about that offline as well.
Here's a question for all four of you. How much has there been any change or not? That is, the null hypothesis is we've always had some feminists, we've always had some macho guys, we've had some people who are anti-macho, and we've had a small number of real serious political activists. But even though there were lots of them from across the US in front of the Capitol, these are still, as measured by the size of the chat groups in China, these are tiny groups. They don't, and are they as large as the KKK in the 19th century? So some way for all four of you of saying what's new and is there really anything new would be worth answering. And I'd say that's a particular version of the broader question of context. that is if you choose one particular site, and as you've all pointed out, these have their particular rules of the game as to where and why, who gets included. You have to wait 5 years before you can be a regular member. I mean, that's amazing, etc. How much do these kinds of factors shift? Or if you're focusing on the official statements of the leadership of China for a work ethic, what are the other statements of the Chinese leadership? That is, I mentioned sort of by example, look at page 3 or another page of the 5-year plan, and you'll find other themes, not just about work, but also about consumption and leisure and so forth. So in a sense, I'm giving you about 3 or 4 variations of the same basic question. What's new and what's new? Is this context you are focusing on any different than other contexts, or is it a sample selection bias? That is, if you just sampled and you've chosen to focus on the Proud Boys, but how many people have ever heard of the Proud Boys? I mean, they're not the Democratic Party, they're not the KKK. It's a small marginal group, and so thinking how to systematically answer that question, such as looking at a national survey of all Americans and where would you place your own political ideology? And so people can say Democrat, Republican, independent, then they can say something like other, but then you may be able to get to something else, which, or if not in that way, you could look at the numbers of votes for something else, or you can look at the the membership size of the Proud Boys. And then look at that compared to other kinds of small but distinctive groups, such as are included in the anti-Muslim study that we read. So I'm suggesting, you're getting, I mean, you two guys have in a sense been more, I would say, explicit about than questions of causality, even though you say you're doing a descriptive study. You're talking about the big issue of how much is this the individual choosing something versus being imposed by capitalism or Adorno and Horkheimer's Hollywood, where there's no agency by the individual. And this is changing, or at least it's being visibly documented in China as well, where you have the emergence of these social media sites, and you can see people saying things which at least implicitly suggest that I can make a difference about my own life, and I'm going to report these things that, you know, my boyfriend hugged me too hard and I'm angry, etc. So that is how much to join an anecdotal statement like that with something bigger, and to say how much is new, and then to go in with more detail and to use the more qualitative, sensitive, illuminating ethnographic instances, such as standing in front of the White House simultaneous with the electoral votes being counted, being all thus covered on television and having thousands of people there, and then having Trump speaking. That gave it a particular newsworthy focus. But how big was it, and how much is distinctly new versus being distinctly packaged, which clearly we get in a different way with the coverage. And I'd suggest one at least is, and I'm mentioning this because none of you four have really done something like this in a sense. I mean, you have a bit in talking about, so where do we have the emergence of this anti-feminist kind of, and you mentioned 3 factors, Teo Evans, the internet, the change in the labor force away from heavy duty lifting jobs and so forth. I mean, that's the kind of thing I'm suggesting you look at a little more explicitly, all of you, and think in some of those terms, and that is, and look for ways yourself that, and probably other people have done this, but if you look for what they have said, that is not just giving us the simplest media coverage, but pushing yourselves to ask a little bit harder, bigger questions, such as, has the work ethic declined or not in China or anywhere else? And that's that's a complicated question. And Richard Florida, who's written a lot about creativity, basically is implying that no, that even though there's a lot of focus on leisure time and consumption, he basically is saying at least the top people are so caught up with their creativity concerns, which they also love, people working, top people, more programmers at Microsoft and so forth. These people are working as hard as ever, and reading what the national government says about the work ethic is irrelevant for them. But so where and why do these alternative surrounding factors feed in to the context and potentially change the dynamics of what causes what within the context which you're studying? So the two of you talking about the Chinese media sites, the two women on feminism and nationalism, you don't ask some of the questions which the two Teos are asking, which is what's new and is there value added by the social medium participation? We heard a little bit of that about maybe the people who have more risk or who are willing to take more risk don't need the social support. But who's willing to take more risk? Where, I mean, contextualizing that kind of labeling of high or low risk in this interesting, different kind of context for using the term risk could be elaborated. Okay, time is going on. Although no, we're doing okay. I've commented. Anyone else have comments on say what I have said? Just as this is a little more general, and or we can get the two more presentations, then we can talk more generally about everybody. Yeah, why don't we do that? Let's get the two unless there's something quick you want to raise about what I've said right now. Okay, so we have Lena and Yiling, who wants to present first?
Okay, I think I can go first.
Okay, please do.
Okay. I'm gonna share my screen. So basically, my project is about to discuss where do the new ideas come from, and I focus this analysis in the science community. At first, it's a phenomenon that we observed from the, a very a frequencies analysis about the new concept that was proposed by the scientific paper every year, and also the quantities of the paper, the number of the publications that was published every year. And we found out that the new concept proposed every year is decreasing, while the production of the science community is exponentially increasing. And we are asking this kind of idea because the science community pursuing the new ideas is almost is a goal for almost all researchers. So, but there seems to be a limitation on the the whole qualities of the new concept that we could have. It seems like we only have limited vocabularies in our daily life to describe everything. So with the limited vocabularies in science community, can we still pursue the, to explain the new phenomena in real life and solve the new problems proposed by the science communities? And here, the Moulton proposed that under the limited of the new concept, we can still have the many increasing new ideas because we can have the recombinations of existing ideas, and the recombinations of the the existing ideas can open a new doors for the new researchers. It's like so we are kind of asking these kind of ideas that how science proceeds with the existing frontiers. And the first role is a two mode of the science proceeding, the how science proceed. So this one is like, sorry, it's like a family trees. It's like or the new fields or the new communities is resulted from the existing branch, and the science will proceed in a directional way. And so another mode of the proceeding is like, although the new ideas would proceed from its original roots, but it has a connection with very distant ideas. It's like when we are talking about the science today, we still sometimes will, bring the Aristotle into the discussion. So this road is kind of want to ask is kind of question that, do science proceed by forgiving? So this mode say that we need to forget about something so that we can proceed. And this one said that we cannot forget about anything. And but there are two sequences for two kind of mode of this how science proceed. So the first one would say that because it's like the family tree, we human, so there's a theory about the evolution that we human start from the monkey, and also we start from just a cell, and we human have the the same origins with some insects, but we human are different, totally different with the insects. We cannot connect each other. So the same idea is still applied in the science community. When we are in different fields, it's very hard for us to reach to each other and really understand what each other are doing. So cross-field collaboration seem like impossible things. Another sequences of the right side mode of the proceeding of the science is like, because we all remember what happened before, and the new ideas that proposed by the new community would collapse into each other, because it's like the more things we remember and the more similar we are with each other. So these two modes are two hypotheses about how science proceed, and also I introduced about this kind of relevant sequences to the two kind of modes. And I think the science or anything that is relevant to the culture is not just a two mode is not so extreme. In fact, how a community involved in say in the middle of the two modes. But another dimension I want to bring into the discussion about how science proceed, besides this one, how science remember its past, is about the novelty in space. It's kind of like we can think of something that's just come into our minds, and we think it's very conventional to think like this. It's very formal to think so. And some studies suggest that some real important studies would connect very distant items, would connect different, that the things that seem to remote from each others. And so it's kind of like this is a frontier of the science. If next frontier of the science just randomly cite the combine the existing frontier, and how it look, so the existing frontier will how it looks to us that they are very different from each others. On the other side, if the next frontiers just cite cite the existing frontier, the existing frontier will seem like they would collapse into a communities. And this is also how we observed in our communities. For example, that when we are talking about the feminisms, as many of our projects, we will also think some very relevant or other concepts, like the roles of in the families and also the division of labor, things like this. So I think there seems to be so much that I talk about. So let's just go into the design of the research. So this research would want to bring these two dimensions of how we talked about the science into together, and talks about how the distant item or close the neighbor items in the space contributes to the goods of the science in the time. A and B are just the two measurements that I talked about before, and they are already established by other scholars. So the first A panels is they discuss how science proceed by calling its a disruption, and disruption equals to 1, such that it would just so this is a futures work, and this is the focal word we would understand for analysis, and these are the past. So a very disrupted work would just forget about its past and just remember itself. On the other hand, a very developing work would not only cite the focal paper, would not only remember itself, but also remember its past. And their study suggests that some very important work like the Nobel winning items would more close to the disruptive the side. And another side is about the core is about the novelty in of the work. So each paper is a square, and it would connect distant item or the neighborhood atoms. And so the paper that combined distant item would be called like the novel paper. On the other side, it would be called the conventional papers. So the study there, we have a statistical analysis there. We can see like in the line here that the blue one are the disruptive paper, and the yellow one is a developing paper. And we found out basically the disruptive paper are more novel than the developing papers. So if let's go back to these figures, that if a work that combined the very distant things, it seems like it would be regarded as a very important part of the goals of the science tree. On the other side, if a work just combined, very close stuff, it will just seem like not so important stuff in the goals of the family trees. The final analysis is about we come to analysis the how novel paper and the conventional paper. We can look at the panel E and F. Again, it's citation. So we separate the citation into two parts. For first one is the red one is a citation, later citation that not only cite itself, but it's also its reference. And the green one are the citation that only cite itself. So we can say a paper that combine the distant stuff would gain the citation, exclusively attention through a long time. On the other hand, the conventional paper that only combine the neighbor stuff would so basically the developing citation and disruptive citation are equally to each others. So these are basically all the analysis and the data analysis here. And I want to bring into the discussion another part of the scholars' work into discussion in the Latour's, the science in action, because Latour suggests that the science should be started in action, because science itself, while it's in proceeding, it's very difficult to understand, and we perceive the science as a black box. So we do not need to really understand what happened inside. So I think this kind of discussion is kind of relevant to the data analysis we can say did here, because the very novel stuff, although we can start, say from the data analysis that would contribute to the real goals of the science, but this attention or collective the recognition from the community is gained through time. At the very beginning of it, the novel paper would just not gain so much exclusive attention, and also another study suggests that a novel paper would not be recognized at the very beginning after it's published. It's called the Sleeping Beauty in fact, or Sleeping Beauty phenomenon. So it's kind of relevant to the Latour suggests that the science persists as they combine the very difficult stuff to understand at that moment, and then this black box will gradually become clear through the time. And this is basically what I have done. And thank you for the listening.
Okay, just very quick, simple question. This is original quantitative data analysis, which you've done yourself with your own data?
The data, so this project is I'm a research assistant in a lab from the Professor James Evans, and this is work that's collaborative work, and the analysis is done by me because I'm a research assistant, and also the data is collected from the open source database, which is called the Microsoft Academic Graph.
Okay, I'll just compliment you that these are difficult, complicated things to assemble the data, to think about big theories, and then join it with specific analyses. So even if you don't have as many subtle hypotheses as you might, and as you've talked about in earlier versions, for instance, or written about, and we've exchanged about, adding this amount of original empirical work is quite impressive, and so we should cheer you on in that regard. But we have you and Lena to comment on what you have done, and then Lena can present herself. Please do. Yeah, it's 7:07, so we're just yeah, so we have 13 minutes.
Okay, well, I haven't really done anything on my work since last week when I shared my current state of my paper, so I don't know if you would like me to actually elaborate on that, but otherwise I would be happy to just discuss also like other people's work for the remaining 10 minutes. So I don't.
No, that's fine. I mean, your choice. Thank you for being frank and telling us that. And do you have any comments particularly on Yiling's presentation?
No, not really. It was all like very impressive and just also very new to me to think about something like that in this aspect. So just very interesting for me, but yeah, nothing right now that I can add on.
And anyone else have something specific that might help Yiling in her own revisions or questions to ask that she might think about? I'd say another quick comment is that she's closer to many of the themes that you're talking about. When we get to specific questions, natural science is not necessarily all that different from media studies, social media dynamics, et cetera. That is, there are issues of networks, of social relations, of values. I mean, all these things are also key variables in the different writings. I mean, maybe it's not explicit because she hasn't talked about them all, but people like Robert Merton, Bruno Latour, James Evans, they're talking about the same kinds of variables that we are here with values, norms, culture, the culture of science, and rules of innovation, standing on other people's shoulders for innovation, etc. So cheers in bringing that together. Anyone else have comments or suggestions for Yi Lin? Or if not, comments of a more general sort, where and how we could help one another in these remaining minutes, and or in the exchanges, the emails which we can have with each other. And some of you will be working on these issues through the summer. So in that sense, this is not over at all. We're right in the middle. Any agenda things or things to consider to add to the agenda, or things anyone want to say, some of this is too ambitious and you really ought to think of cutting it back so you can make a more creative, specific contribution. Teo, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's a bit more general question. I think might have been Jay that also asked something similar, so I don't know if this will help. But so Durkheim on solidarity, Weber's notion of legitimacy, those two feature very prominently in my piece, just topically, but I haven't been able to really think of a way to introduce them other than, the simple reference to Durkheim and whatnot. I'm wondering if there's a way to bring those older texts in, or if I should just focus on what I have now and not really bother beyond, thinking about things the way they've written about them.
Quick answer is, if those ideas, though, I'd say don't think about another concept per se, but if that dynamic is analyzed about how do you build or support or undermine legitimacy, and it sounds as if that's pretty important for Trump and for the movements around him, which you thus discuss, Proud Boys and more, then I'd say yes, that it's that is. Has anybody given a similar or better interpretation of the dynamics of how can you build or undermine legitimacy than was done by Durkheim and Weber? And what is that idea? Don't worry about the name and the date, but what's the new? Is there a new idea? Keeping in mind what my sort of null hypothesis I stated 10, 15 minutes ago, how much of this is really a change? Was this any different? That is, when Mio gave a critique of Max Weber, that he wasn't explicitly chronological and then dismissed all of Max Weber with that kind of critique. I'd say that's no critique at all. Anybody is that is, I'm mentioning this because somehow I've seen 6 or 7 Chinese students make this kind of quote refutation. I don't know if this is a more widespread rhetorical device or if it comes from social media, but it doesn't seem to me a compelling scientific assessment. So think about that if you were doing that in some of your writing, and watch out for that. I mean, that particular say, when Mio, read what you write about Weber. And I would say it's not compelling at all. And think about that is what at least what I've suggested. Why use Weber? Because he does not have one definition or one measure of nationalism. That Chinese nationalism is different if you're an overseas trader, and that relates to the imperialism versus nationalism idea, that the overseas trader's conception of China may be very different from the local merchant, which is very different from the Mandarin bureaucrat, which is very different from the peasant. And each of these may have, and this was in the past, and there's even more today. So I'd say, look for the strength, try to cite and build on people who've got things which could be useful, but don't deal with weak criticism. Wenbin, you said for today you were going to do something that was a little more general. I can't remember if you were going to comment on somebody else, but do you have anything else as we are nearing the end of our sessions and of the class?
I didn't prepare for general comments, but I think all of you did great presentations.
Okay. Anyone else have either a suggestion or encouraging question, or how can we help you? How can we continue to help you? Well, both of that, I'll say going forward, which covers both people who are graduating now and who are not until the summer or whenever, and who will be rewriting and thinking about these day and night for at least a few more months, and maybe after that. As you've chosen good issues, for sure. All of these are good. They're big, important, complicated, challenging issues. And but because of that, there are lots of people working on them. And I would say, look explicitly at what other people are saying and where and how they are differing from each other. And we've done that in a mini manner by having 4 people dealing with different aspects of gender roles and theorizing, ideologizing, critiquing, and so forth.
For the people graduating in the summer, when would you like the paper in your inbox?
Yeah, I would say my concern is to help you, not to meet a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I can sign the form and say yes anytime, but I want to give you as many helpful ideas as possible. So I would say, don't worry about sending me a final draft. Ask me questions which are on your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Working on it. I'd say that would be my, and then say, here, I have a big question and 3 little versions of it which are here, and I have 2 pages of text which illustrates that. Send me that. Send me.
Okay, so
send me
that's
that.
okay to do periodically.
Sure. So send me that next
Okay.
week, or whenever you've got concerns, and that
Okay.
I want to add value to what you're doing. It's in a way that makes most sense.
Sounds good.
And will you be
The raises that applies to many other people too.
will you be holding office hours on these upcoming Tuesdays, or?
No. I mean, classes are over. Classes are over now, but I would say, I mean, as you have done, send me an email anytime. I'll be here, not traveling.
Thank you.
And
I actually have a question, which is like not super related to our theories or anything, but just some technicalities. So I was just wondering, so I was talking to my advisor today, and I was telling him about my like work in this class, because I've been feeling like pretty good about it and just happy that I'm like getting somewhere with this. And then he was like, maybe I like misunderstood, but he was saying that like I can't necessarily like reuse my work from this term paper, because it would be like some like going in the direction of like plagiarism. Do you like, did I like misunderstood, or it's like, is there any problem with that? Like,
no, I totally disagree. I'm sorry. I would say it's fine to use the same paper in 2 classes, or to use a chapter or part of draft of a thesis as part of the MA. Just say that, announce that to the in the document itself, and say, you know, this course paper is a draft of the MA, or when you do the MA, say this MA draft grew out of course papers which I wrote for these courses, and that's fine.
okay, thank you.
I mean, was it simply as simple as that, or was there something about you know, what you're doing does not seem intellectually acceptable more generally?
Oh no, it was like more like the technical like issue of like, yeah. So maybe I also misunderstood. I don't know, but that kind of just like freaked me out a little. So I just wanted to check in with the stance.
No problem.
Okay.
let me also say I would welcome if anybody either wants to talk privately or send an email with comments on the course, as this is the way I've done it is really quite new and different from what I've done with John Levy Martin in the past. And I'm thinking either of continuing this way as a smaller graduate seminar. It could be converted into a more general lecture course, maybe graduate, undergraduate, could be a combination. But any thoughts on where and how that would be useful? And or if we are to do that, any sections that are strong or weak or helpful or not so helpful at present, I'd welcome your advice on as to how to, as you're making your papers better, how can we make this course better or distinctive in alternative contexts in ways that would be helpful for future students? Or maybe yourselves, if you take graduate work and continue at this university or elsewhere. As I have, I mean, most of my course materials have been online on YouTube and so forth for over 10 years. And so there's a lot of stuff there, and I'd be delighted to keep in touch with you and see where things go. And as I've said before, a lot of what's in this head, I learned from you. So thank you for teaching me some new things and challenging some old questions and old answers. We all learn from each other. I'm raising a toast to all of you with there we go. Cheers, good luck, and good progress. Onward, onward. Thank you all. Yeah, I'll stay on for a little bit if you have anything you want to discuss individually that you've not done so right now.